All right, folks, I'm going to try this out because the only way to get started is to do it. You know what I'm saying? All right, well, welcome everybody to MaxMcCool's DM Tools. Season 1, Episode 1? Yeah, let's go with that. This is the first ever episode of adventure creation using the monster manual from A to Z, or Z, depending on where you're from. I'd like to thank you all for stopping by and giving it a listen. Let's dive right into it. First monster on the block, the Aarakocra, which is now, has been for a while, a playable character. Or you could create a PC using the Aarakocra species. So, give you guys a little bit of insight into how I'm planning on doing this. Basically, what I want to do is I'm going to take I'm going to take each individual monster from alphabetical order in the monster manual, and I'm going to develop a adventure or mission or quest surrounding them as the main antagonist. But before that, because I feel it's good to have some knowledge or be informed to a degree of what the monster is all about and how they operate outside of just their stat block, I'm going to read out the description of the creature, and it'll help inform us of how we can frame an adventure quest around this particular monster as the main antagonist. And I hope that it'll be beneficial to new, budding, and even experienced DMs, where they can get a bit of an idea of how how a creature operates, how a monster operates, and they can use parts and pieces of the adventure that I kind of come up with on the spot, or they may not, but it may lead them to have some sort of inspirational moment where they come up with an adventure all on their own. So, page 12 of the monster manual, the Aarakocra. Let's begin. Aarakocra ranged the howling gyre, an endless storm of mighty winds and lashing rains that surrounds the tranquil realm of Aka in the elemental plane of air. Making aerial patrols, these bird-like humanoids guard the windy borders of their home against invaders from the elemental plane of earth, such as gargoyles, their sworn enemies. Enemies of elemental evil. In service to the Wind Dukes of Aka, Aarakocra scout the plains in search of temples of elemental evil. Stupid phone. Thank goodness this is a dry run. They spy on malign elemental creatures and then either take the fight to those creatures or report back to the Wind Dukes. On the material plane, Aarakocra create aeries atop the highest mountains, especially peaks near portals to the elemental plane of air. From such heights, Aarakocra watch for signs of elemental incursions, as well as for nascent threats to their home plane. Aarakocra prefer to live their lives like the wind, unburdened and ever-moving, yet they watch over a region for years, if that's what it takes to guard against the incursions of elemental evil. Aarakocra have no concept of political borders or property ownership, and the value of gems, gold, and other precious materials means little to Aarakocra. In their eyes, a creature should use what is necessary and then cast what is left on the wind for others to use. Search for the 7 shards. The Wind Dukes of Aka come from a race of elemental beings called the Vati, which once ruled many worlds. A creature known as the Queen of Chaos arose and initiated an interplanar war against Vati rule. To combat the threat, 7 Vati heroes combined their powers to create the mighty Rod of Law. In a battle against the Queen's greatest general, Mishka the Wolf Spider, a Vati killed Mishka by thrusting the rod into him like a spear. The rod shattered into 7 shards that scattered across the multiverse. Aarakocra seeks signs of the pieces' locations in order to rebuild what is now known as the Rod of 7 Parts. Here's a little subtext box. Summoning air elementals. 5 Aarakocra within 30 feet of each other can magically summon an air elemental. Each of the 5 must use its action and movement on 3 consecutive turns to perform an aerial dance, and must maintain concentration while doing so, as if concentrating on a spell. When all 5 have finished their 3rd turn of the dance, the elemental appears in an unoccupied space within 60 feet of them. It is friendly toward them and obeys their spoken commands. It remains for 1 hour until it or all its summoners die, or until any of its summoners dismiss it as a bonus action. A summoner can't perform the dance again until it finishes a short rest. When the elemental returns to the elemental plane of air, any Aarakocra within 5 feet of it can return with it. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Okay, let's go through the stat block. Aarakocra is a medium humanoid. Aarakocra, neutral good. Armor class of 12, 13 hit points average, a speed of 20 feet walking, flying 50 feet. The strength of 10, dexterity of 14, constitution of 10, intelligence of 11, wisdom of 12, charisma of 11. Skills it has are perception plus 5, not too shabby, makes sense. Senses, passive perception 15. Languages it speaks is Aran, and it's a 1/4 challenge. Has a dive attack, where if the Aarakocra is flying and dives at least 30 feet straight toward a target and hits it with a melee weapon attack, the attack deals an extra 3 average or 1d6 damage to the target. Its actions include a Talon attack, which is a melee weapon attack, which it has +4 to hit with a reach of 5 feet on 1 target. The hit does an average of 4 or 1d4 +2 slashing damage. It also has a Javelin, which is melee or ranged attack weapon, because it can be thrown with a +4 to hit as well, and a reach of 5 feet or a range of 30 to 120 feet on 1 target. If it hits, it deals an average of 5 or 1d6 +2 piercing damage. Alright, so already starting off with a little bit of a challenge, because the Aarakocra are neutral good by general alignment, but that's not a hindrance at all. You could work that in to an adventure, or you could just say, hey, well, these Aarakocra are not good. They're very, very bad. So let's see. I like that they are effectively guards and wardens of these portals to the elemental plane of air, which I think is a very, very cool note that can be used to kind of mutate an adventure into that, whereas you could effectively set your adventurers on a path that requires them to enter the elemental plane of air through one of these portals, and then they encounter Aarakocra along the way, or once they get there, trying to defend the portal and, prohibit them from entering. Another thing that I thought was very interesting, if you wanted to set it up as a surprise, which I probably would do, is use things such as their enemies, like gargoyles, to kind of lead the adventurers into that direction, so that it kind of becomes a curveball, right? So as a quick, just kind of dry run pass for an adventure, the way I would set it up is that perhaps here's a way that it could go down. Perhaps the adventurers are approached by a trader or a merchant, something of that nature. And this merchant has discovered some rumors or information that would lead him or her to believe that there is a piece, a very strong magical piece, segment of something that used to be either a spear or a staff or a rod or a wand or something. But there has been information disseminated to them that there is a section of something much grander that can be found just past that portal into the elemental plane of air. However, the path to that portal is rife with danger and hazards because this is a D&D adventure, and that the merchant will pay very, very well and reward the PCs with gold or perhaps some discounts on their products or what have you for this section, for this magical shard. So you send, presuming, I should say, that the PCs accept the offer and take the quest, what you could do there is you could essentially have them make their way over to where this portal is. Now, there's no real specific area, environment, geological kind of signatures that are in this description that provide too much information about where these portals are placed, where the Aarakocra kind of reside or guard and stuff like that, which is cool. It gives you a little bit of freedom. What would make sense to me is that they would probably, just because of the fact that they're bird-like creatures, avian type humanoids, and they guard windy borders of their home and stuff like that. I would probably set the portal somewhere like up near the top of a mountain, or perhaps on like a cliffside, at the edge of a cliffside that is outside of, a clearing, on a clearing that is just outside of a heavily wooded forest or jungle with a lot of trees and plant life and stuff like that. And you can then kind of pepper in these kinds of things where the adventurers are making their way through. And let's take the forest, for example, right? Let's take a wooded area because it's common and you can do a lot with it. And so they're traveling, they have to go through this forest or this wooded area. And once they make their way through, they get to the base of a mountain, or the top of they make their way up through it. And they get to a clearing. As they're traveling through the wood or wooded area, you can then put in a few enemies there, something easy, something typical, something that wouldn't really provide them with any sort of suspicion as to what it is that they are gonna have to go up against in order to get this shard, this piece, this magical piece. You can have them go through and be kind of ambushed or encountered by wolves, like a pack of wolves. That's a very, I think, common enemy to find in a wooded area or a forest, and have a nice little combat section there, right? And it gives them a little victory. It gives them a bit of confidence. It boosts the morale and allows them to feel as though they're making progress towards this final goal. You may then bring them further, or if they venture further, you can pace it out so that as they get their way further and further through the wooded area, the creatures that they encounter become less and less common to the material plane, right? So you start off with some wolves, let's say, just for the sake of simplicity. You start off with a pack of wolves. They fight this pack of wolves. They succeed. They do well. They travel a little bit further. They end up taking camp for the night. The next morning, they're on the road again. They're making their way through the woods and stuff like that. And they start to see strange areas in the woods that have patches of rubble, some kind of rock piles that are kind of clumped up in little pockets here and there in a concentrated space, right? And as they're walking through, going through these woods, past these piles of rubble and stuff like that, maybe they see, maybe they hear or see what looks like birds flying in the air and stuff like that, but they're so high up, they're so far up that they can't make out what kind of bird it is, or if it's a, how large it is, stuff like that. I mean, unless you have a ranger with you, that has a good survival or a good nature skill, then you can tell them, like, depending on their role, of course, but you could let them know, like, oh, this is a big flying creature, right? Either way, in any case, you send the adventurers on. They make their way through the woods. You could have them encounter something else, another thing of forest creatures or woods creatures, maybe a bear, maybe an owl bear, if you'd like, or you could actually, one thing that would be pretty cool, I think, is you could have them walk into a scene, right, where maybe an owl bear is fighting a gargoyle, and the gargoyle has its wing torn off, and the owl bear is just kind of like pummeling this thing and beating it. And, the players can then decide to step in or see how it plays out, and, either take on the owl bear or the gargoyle or both, depending on what they choose to do, right? So that's a second encounter you can create right there. I mean, it's a combat one. They may choose to just, avoid that stuff as well, right? I'm trying to implement scenarios, and create sequences of events that players walk into or stumble upon, just encounter. Though all of these could very well be combat scenarios. Technically speaking, any encounter in D&D could theoretically be a combat scenario, right? Someone could be asking for information from the local guard, or, have an audience with the king, and all of a sudden it's a combat sequence because a PC decides to fire an arrow at them or something like that. So the way you morph these encounters is up to you and up to your PCs and what they decide to do, right? Anyway, moving on. So after that encounter, they continue to make their way through, and then perhaps as they're making their way through towards this portal, maybe they're ascending the mountain, stuff like that. Now, they begin to see and encounter a much greater presence of more odd types of creatures. Maybe they see a bunch of gargoyles now flying and making their way up the mountain, or up the raised terrain towards the cliff top at the edge of the woods. Maybe they see an earth elemental, or maybe the trackings, the markings of it, though earth elementals don't really leave much in their wake because they can just go into the earth. But maybe you see more piles of rocks, of rubble, these pockets and puddles of broken up chunks of rock, and strewn about them, mixed in with them, you see feathers and claws and beaks, right? to indicate a battle that has taken place. I would say, again, a survival or a nature check, high enough would reveal that there was certainly a fight that went on between a bird-like creature and, a stony type creature. Which, I mean, at the end of the day, I think will just inform them more, and they can go further and further with that, right? And I mean, if they get a natural 20 on any of these checks, doesn't necessarily mean you have to just give them the answer and say, oh yeah, an Aarakocra or a band of Aarakocra were fighting gargoyles, and this is the remnants of that battle, right? You can also dictate how long ago it's been, how old it is, how long the piles and feathers have been sitting there for. Anyway, moving right along. So then, what I think I would have happen is I would have them make their way up, continuously up the mountain. I'm just going to use the mountain aesthetic for the sake of simplicity, right? Maybe they break through the woods and, through the tree line, and they see that they're at the base of the mountain. They got to make their way up a mountain. How steep and precarious and dangerous and stuff like that you want to make it is up to you. But I would probably personally provide a little pathway, maybe a route that kind of, takes the long way up the mountain, spirals it and stuff like that. Unless you want to create an instance where they have to climb up these craggy rocks and make their way up to a footing, like a flat footing where they can stand up and look around and maybe be encountered by something there. But either way, sometime up the mountain, they make their way up and they can encounter, again, a band of, creatures from the elemental plane of Earth. I'm using gargoyles continuously because it's their sworn enemies, but you could swap that out for anything, Earth elementals. I'm losing my my memory of other creatures from the elemental plane of Earth, but you could swap those in for any sort of monster, right? The most important thing read from the description block is that they are guards of the elemental plane of air, and they guard their borders from invaders of the elemental plane of Earth, right? So you could use any sort of elemental Earth creatures, such as Earth elementals, or perhaps even just a wizard, or who is trying to get there as well. And this wizard is prone to summoning creatures of elemental Earth, or even a druid, right? That can wild shape, into an Earth elemental, stuff of that nature. Anyway, they make their way up the mountain, and as they make their way up, they can encounter gargoyles and Earth elementals that are going up against an air elemental, as Aarakocra can summon these air elementals. And you watch that combat ensue. They can jump in, the PCs they can jump in and try to take on everybody and fight everything and destroy everything, which would probably put them in poor favor of the Aarakocra. Or again, you can have them, they can sit and watch and see how it plays out and kind of clean up the remnants after the fact. Unless they're spotted, of course, right? Remember that all of your monsters and stuff like that, I mean, clearly they'd be occupied with combat and fighting for survival, but treat your monsters like your NPCs. If you have a monster that's very perceptive, such as an Aarakocra, actually, maybe they're maybe the creature spots them or hears something that makes them turn their head and make note of the PCs or call out the PCs, right? Anyhow, so I would say that they would probably come into something like that, watch this kind of battle in progress as this is occurring. And in this instance, or even before, as they're making their way up the side of the mountain, let's say, you could then have the Aarakocra appear, right? Now you could have the Aarakocra appear, say they jump into combat, you could have the Aarakocra appear once the players decide to attack the air elemental as it was summoned or manifested by the Aarakocra, right? This is just using the subtext block of summoning air elementals on the page itself of the monster manual, right? Now, it's a 1/4 challenge creature, which means that in a party of 4, one PC should be able to handle a single Aarakocra. Well, if there's an air elemental right there, that indicates to you that there has to be at least 5 Aarakocra to summon one, right? Now, maybe there's 2 air elementals, which means there's got to be at least 10 Aarakocra. You see how the numbers can add up quite quickly. So say you have, let's say 3 gargoyles, an earth elemental fighting 2 air elementals. So now you have 3 gargoyles and an earth elemental fighting 2 air elementals and 10 Aarakocra flying around somewhere, right? You could have the Aarakocra descend and speak with the adventurers, speak with your party, and come down and say, please help us, we would appreciate it. These monsters are trying to take over our home. They're trying to get in to the portal to our plane of, our elemental plane, where our where our lives are, where our homes are, our families are. Please help us. Now, if the players have jumped into the fray and they attack the air elemental, you could have the air elemental not the air elemental. You could have the Aarakocra jump down or fly down, swoop down, if they're patrolling in the air or anything like that, and have them just attack the players on site, right? Now, just because an Aarakocra is, traditionally aligned to be good, like I said earlier, they don't necessarily have to be good. And just because they are good doesn't necessarily mean that the context of the situation that they find themselves in will inform them of remaining good or neutral good, right? In fact, the neutral good is a pretty good indicator that in an instance like this, they probably would not swoop down land in the middle of a combat, let's say, with their sworn enemies of gargoyles and earth elementals being fought off by the air elementals that they've summoned, and then this random group of ragtag adventurers comes in and starts fighting and attacks their air elemental, and they're gonna go, okay, whoa, hold the phone. Nice to meet you guys. Where are you from? Let's not get off on the wrong foot, right? They're in the heat of combat. Sure, these Aarakocra might be good, but right now it's the enemy of my enemy type thing, right? So they might jump in and try to prevent you from doing more damage to the air elementals and stuff like that. They might just see you as another enemy. They might see you as cohorts of this evil wizard, perhaps the merchant that wanted you to go get that one shard is the evil wizard. You see, you can start tying in all of these things and start creating very interesting results or outcomes from simple little pieces of information that you have extracted from this description block of this monster, right? So you have that as another encounter, and maybe the players defeat all the enemies, maybe the players defeat all the Aarakocra without conversation or anything like that. And if that's the case, then they make their way, they continue on. And remember, there's 10 Aarakocra if there are 2 air elementals there. So you could have 5 come down, right? You could have 5 Aarakocra come down, and it would be a very, very hairy fight if the players were to jump in kind of from the jump. You know what I mean? From seeing what's happening to running in, kind of eyes closed, head down. but you can still keep 5 of them, kind of hidden away, guarding the top where the of the mountain where the portal is. Or you could have all 10 come down and then the other 5 get up and, fly away. That's definitely possible as well for a future encounter. Either way, so the players would go through that encounter, and the result would be however it was. Now, perhaps they, perhaps through the conversation in combat, they would be informed that they're not the enemy and stuff like that, and all of that kind of nature, right? All that kind of stuff, rather. And they would make their way to, post-combat, they would have a conversation with the Aarakocra, and maybe the Aarakocra would lead them up there and stuff like that. Or maybe say, hey, no, we can't let anyone through. We have to guard this stuff. We have to guard the portal. We have enough issues with these... gargoyles and elemental earth beings. We really don't need material plane beings coming in and mucking up the situation more so than it already is, right? Either way, I'm going to presume that your players will be headstrong and continue forward as they have a task at hand. And they make their way up to the top of the mountain, in which you can incorporate all sorts of things on the way up, right? You could input a cave that maybe has some treasure but is guarded by a bear, that's where they reside. Or maybe there's a little altar to something, maybe a god, maybe a deity or a demon or something like that, right? Maybe there's a secret passageway that leads to the top of the mountain, as a shortcut, right? You could set that even lower in the mountain if you wanted to give your players the opportunity to bypass, that encounter or those encounters or what have you, right? So they make their way up to the top of the mountain. And when they get there, they see this portal, right? Or perhaps they don't. Perhaps it's just like a stone archway or something that's empty. And they have to perform some sort of process or ritual to get through there, right? Now, if you wanted to go that route, then you'd require something that was a bit more of a negotiation, kind of bartering situation with the Aarakocra, because your players would have no reason to know how the portal is opened, right? So they'd kind of have to request the Aarakocra open the portal, right? If that was the case. I mean, if you didn't want to go that route of negotiation, you could use the merchant. Perhaps the merchant has some sort of artifact or key or stone or something that they can set in somewhere and use, to open up the portal, right? And if the Aarakocra have all been slaughtered by your players, then perhaps you just leave the portal open as it's just a portal, like it's present. It's not been closed. It's open. It remains open because, you don't know the choices that your players are going to make till they make them. And then you kind of got to work around those, right? So I'm just trying to keep the options open for you for the end result. So once they make their way to the top of the elemental plane, if you're seeking out a large combat, you can have those other 5 Aarakocras standing up there. Maybe one jumps into the portal and maybe comes out with 5 more or 10 more. Or maybe you could do just like a swarm of Aarakocra fly out this portal and kind of, the birds will blot out the sun, and maybe it'll make for an affair of I was going to say flight, of fleeing, right? Or maybe the players will take the opportunity of all of these creatures coming out once they're all out, of jumping into the portal to take the shard, right? The piece that they need. You can have them jump right in and have the shard there, take it, but then they're stuck in the elemental plane of air, right? Or you could have the shard be some vast distance away from the portal, and that sets up your next adventure for them, right? For the next session. Or you could have a massive combat with the Aarakocra that come out. Or again, if you go the negotiation path, you can then have the the players kind of negotiate with the Aarakocra. Maybe they have to go speak to the tribe's leader. Maybe it's an artifact. Maybe the shard is kind of set upon the top of the javelin of the chief of this particular tribe of Aarakocra, right? And then they have to negotiate. Maybe there's some sort of gauntlet there. Maybe they have to have like a rite of passage or a feat of strength in order to earn their prize, and the prize is whatever they would like. And there's that, right? So there's a lot of ways you can kind of morph and mutate this to make it your own and make it interesting for the players that sit at your table. But I think that there's a lot can be done for a very simple, kind of low challenge, typical creature in the monster block that can provide an interesting experience or an interesting adventure, right? Now, I'm not, as I'm sure heard, I'm not setting any difficulty settings for this. I'm not giving any suggested levels for these adventures. I'm not giving any checks or any numbers for checks. That's not up to me. That's up to you as the DM, up to how challenging you want the adventure to be, up to how you want the game to progress and flow, stuff like that. All I'm doing here is trying to impart options and possibilities and potentials of things, the potentiality of things for you to implement in your adventure. You can pick and choose things and put them together to make this adventure. You can go totally different from the route that I went, right? My goal here is to use the information that was provided to me by wizards in their book and to kind of piece together an adventure from the book itself and the creature itself, because I feel like if you can do that, if a DM can do that, you can truly unlock the power of the book, and I know that large blocks of text can be intimidating or scary or boring, and kind of seen as unworthy of one's time. But there's a lot of little kind of nuggets of information and gold here that you can pull out, and then you can take that stuff and morph and mutate it to your heart's content and into a way that will turn out fun and enjoyable and memorable, perhaps, at your table. But that's about it. That's about it till the next adventure. I'd like to thank you guys all for stopping by and listening to this long-winded podcast about Aarakocra at the start. Thank you for tuning in to the first episode of MaxMcCool's DM Tools Monster Manual from A to Z, or Z, depending on the where location that you may be at. That's it for now. Next episode, the Aboleth. That's a big jump from the Aarakocra to the Aboleth, but I'm excited to build something from there for you guys and keep things going, right? Anyway, have a good day, guys, and I'll be sure to talk to you soon.